Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Karen Doyle, Operations Director of CTAM Europe. Welcome you to today's webinar. I'm happy to introduce you to Scott Halpert, who is SVP Products and Partnerships at Penthera, and our very own long-standing CTAM Europe board member and ex-chair, Marco Frazier, whose day job is founder and CEO of Screen+. We're scheduled for around 30 minutes today, which will include time for a Q&A session at the end. Please do get involved and post your questions by using the Q&A button, and Scott and Marco will answer them at the end of the session. As always, the recording of this presentation will be posted onto the members-only section of ctameurope.com. If you're not a current member, please email info@ctameurope.com for more details. Members have access to a monthly webinar and also webinars and monthly podcasts from CTAM US. We have an annual symposium, which is due to take place in autumn. And also we have our flagship program, which is the annual executive management program, which we hold at INSEAD in France, and it is happening on Sunday next week. So we'll open registration up for the class of 2024 after that's all happened. So Penthera and Screen+ will receive the registration list for today's webinar and will follow up with their own news separately. So thank you for tuning in, and I'm now going to go off screen, hand you over to Scott and Marco. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here today. Hello, everyone. As everyone knows, the TV landscape continues to evolve very quickly, changing all the time. There's a lot of attention on AVOD, advertising video on demand, which is now growing 20% faster than SVOD, subscription video on demand. And everybody wants to know how best to monetize this. So for that, we're set up for an interesting and informative discussion today with Scott Halpert. As Karen mentioned, Scott is Penthera's Vice President of Products and Partnerships. So welcome, Scott. And can you give us a little bit of background about what Penthera does?
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Very nice to be here, and nice to have the opportunity to speak to all of you, if only virtually. Penthera is an 11-year-old company, and we operate globally. We have customers in essentially 36 countries, or customers that have users in 36 countries. And the company started by providing a download solution for SVOD companies. So think Paramount Plus, Red Bull, Beachbody, and a bunch of others. And we evolved that into providing the ability to download AVOD streams to mobile devices. But 2 years ago, or a little over 2 years ago now, we made the decision to look at how do we expand our business in two key ways. The first was, how can we bring forward solutions that can be deployed ubiquitously throughout the streaming ecosystem? So onto CTV, onto streaming devices like a Roku or Amazon Fire Stick. And how do we begin to provide services that directly tie into monetization and impact, obviously positively, the monetization of our customer streams? And when I'm talking about monetization in this context, I mean advertising. And the result of this effort is our first product that we call Second Look. This is a solution that sits alongside Server Side Ad Insertion. It's a cloud service. It can interact with any streaming device, and it increases revenue for our clients' VOD assets, or video on demand assets.
Okay. From your point of view, what's the state of the OTT market today? And where do you think it's heading, Scott? And specifically, when you look at fast channel on one side versus the AVOD, SVOD debate on the other side.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time in the industry, as I'm sure everybody here knows. Over the past few years, there's been a tremendous amount of evolution. A big component of that has been the shift in consumer behavior that occurred and accelerated during the pandemic. We saw over the past number of years a lot of SVOD services being launched. And then now, at this point, we're seeing those services launching their AVOD tiers, or their ad-supported video on demand tiers. The reason that they're doing this is to give their consumers, or the potential buyers, more options as consumers reach or begin to reach ceilings of what they can afford for managing multiple SVOD services. And it also drives increased average revenue per user, or ARPU, because they have the combination of a small subscription fee plus advertising revenue. And the other trend, another trend that we're seeing is that FAST has really taken off. The growth of FAST channels and the acceptance of FAST channels has been really astounding to see. Underpinning a lot of this growth are two technologies that we're going to be talking about today. One is Server Side Ad Insertion, where we see a lot of publishers adopting Server Side Ad Insertion. And the other is the growth in the use of programmatic channels to buy and sell the advertising inventory. We see a lot of experimentation with business models from publishers. So the hybrid tiers that I mentioned before, we see publishers that are distributing purely as FAST channels. We see content owners that are licensing their content to third parties. And given the rapid change and growth from consumers, we expect to see this experimentation continue into the future. The market is still fairly new and is just figuring out how to best deliver high quality experiences to end consumers and how best to monetize those experiences. So for example, you mentioned FAST. A few years ago, it was relatively easy to get into the FAST game, right? You could, as an independent company, license a back channel of content, contract with a playout vendor, and have an EPG associated with it, contract with a server-side ad insertion company, which at times was the same as your playout vendor, and distribute that content fairly widely. Today, that is changing meaningfully, right? The bar of entry is being raised, both in terms of the quality of content that's required to get consumers' attention, but also what's required to get distribution. And what the reason for that is that the panel manufacturers and the OTT device manufacturers are starting their own FAST businesses. They're going out and licensing content. They're going and controlling the entire monetization workflow for that content. They essentially want to own the living room because they have a device that sits in the living room that's the main user interface or user experience for that living room, and it affords them the ability to control much more of it. So these companies are deploying their own FAST channels, which raises the bar for an independent company to get onto their distribution. The good news is that for companies that own their own libraries of content, they can play in the FAST ecosystem in a very meaningful way. On the technology side, I mentioned server-side ad insertion or SSAI. This, coupled with programmatic advertising, delivers a very scalable solution. It enables a very high-quality user experience and a strong monetization mechanism for that user experience. However, it's an imperfect system, right? Quite often we see publishers pushing on their ad tech partners to maximize revenue output, which is certainly one of the steps that they should be taking. But these companies, their ad servers or their supply side platforms or the DSPs or the demand side platforms that they work with, they're held or beholden to the ad insertion process, and understanding how that process works and the implications of that process on monetization is really critical. And this is the part of the value chain that we as a company are very focused on for our current product second look and future products that we're rolling out.
Okay. Thanks for that top line view on what's happening today. It sounds like leading OTT publishers are moving to server-side advertising insertion rather than client-side ad insertion. What are some of the main reasons for that?
Yeah, there are a number of really good reasons for that. It's a big trend that we see, certainly with the largest publishers, and now we're starting to see it even with mid-tier and smaller publishers. And like I said, there are a number of reasons for this. With client-side ad insertion, or what you might see listed, with the acronym CSAI, there's a handoff between two different players. So there's one player that's playing the content, which is an AVR stream, and then there's another player that is playing the ads, which are not AVR or adapted bitrate assets. And this handoff can be quite problematic. It can cause long pauses in between the transition from watching content to having ads start. It can actually cause streams to break. It enables more failures of ads where the ads don't actually load. And from a user's perspective, they often will see a discontinuity between the quality of the video image of the content they're watching and the quality of the image that is displayed when the ads are playing. All of these sort of problems that I mentioned can be really quite off-putting to users. And when you look at abandonment rates from stalls and broken streams, they can be quite high. And what that effectively means is that publishers are losing revenue. Beyond this, fast and live streaming are not suitable for client-side ad insertion. And the biggest reason for that is that it introduces latency into the process, which becomes problematic when you're trying to stream out a feed of content that's the same for all users that are consuming it. And publishers are looking for ways to reduce operational overhead. With client-side ad insertion, effectively, it means that you have to maintain multiple different solutions depending on whether you're, how you're distributing. So you might have one solution that works for Samsung, another solution that works for Amazon Fire, another solution that works for Vizio. It gets to be complicated from an operational overhead standpoint. And publishers, if they're doing both fast and video on demand, for example, they don't really want to have to maintain two very different ad insertion schemes, one which is server-side ad insertion for fast, and then potentially client-side ad insertion for VOD. Server-side ad insertion ultimately delivers a much more improved user experience because it's a single player that's playing the entire asset, whether it's video or advertising. And publishers can control the transcoding of the advertising, which makes sure that the image quality of that advertising can closely match the image quality of the content that's being played. Additionally, server-side ad insertion can dramatically reduce stalls, stream breakage, and other problems that are caused by either the handoff or the ads themselves. And with server-side ad insertion, publishers can offer the same level of targeting, in other words, audience-based targeting, which we'll get into, that client-side ad insertion enables. And given the growth of programmatic and the demand on the buy side or advertisers to use programmatic to execute, server-side ad insertion has really been designed to support that kind of execution. So at the end of the day, you can, by using server-side ad insertion, deliver what is essentially a broadcast quality experience to your users, still enable a high degree of targeting for your advertising, and eliminate a lot of problems that exist with client-side ad insertion.
Okay, so Scott, it sounds like it's fair to say there are a lot of opportunities there, but also maybe a few challenges presented by SSAI for both the advertisers and the publishers. What are the revenue implications of this?
Yeah, so we talk to a lot of publishers that are either transitioning to server-side ad insertion or have already deployed it. And generally, they see some very significant benefits in terms of a lot of the things I talked about, right? The users are staying around longer. There's less loss of revenue from stream breakage, et cetera. That said, there are ways that they can further optimize the monetization and the user experience. And this is where we're focused on helping, as I mentioned before. The biggest opportunity from using server-side ad insertion, as I mentioned before, is that it improves the user experience pretty dramatically. And it also enables support for programmatic-based buying, and it streamlines the operational process. And I'll get into some of those a little bit later, but the biggest challenge is that the insertion process has an impact on how and when ads are, the ad decisions are actually made. And this affects the ad tech systems that
Hi, Scott. Sorry to jump in. I can't hear you now. Marco, can you hear Scott?
asset.
I can now. It sounds like he's back.
I can now. Perfect.
Okay. So sorry, where did I drop off?
About 40 seconds back.
Yeah.
Oh, so I didn't answer the opportunities and challenges question.
Yeah. Parts of it. Yeah, I would rewind 30 seconds or so. Yeah.
Okay. So what I was saying is we talked to a lot of publishers that have deployed server-side ad insertion or are deploying it. And generally they're seeing a lot of significant benefits, particularly around the lack of stream drop-off due to technical failures and the increase in the user experience that they're delivering with server-side ad insertion.
Okay.
The biggest opportunity for using server-side ad insertion, as I mentioned before, is the improved user experience, the support for programmatic based buying, and the streamlining of their operational processes. The biggest challenge, however, is that the insertion process has an impact on the ad decisioning systems, their ad server, the supply side platforms that they work with, the DSPs that they work with, that publishers need to be aware of. And so if we focus on video on demand for a moment and how that process works, it becomes clear why this impacts the decisioning process, the decisioning system. So with video on demand, unlike everything else in digital, the decisions are made at a point in time that's displaced from when the ads are actually going to run. Everything else in digital is done on a just-in-time basis. And so with video on demand, when you press play on a device to select to watch a movie, all of the ad decisions for that movie are made in between the time you press play and the first frame of that video showing up. And this has a number of meaningful effects on how the monetization of these assets work. So first, the publisher has to choose how much time they're going to allot for that. They have to set timeout limits on their ad server to make all the decisions for that movie. And sometimes, for example, if it's a 2-hour movie, there can be 60 or 80 ad decisions that need to be made, and those decisions take a lot of time. And so you have to balance this sort of give and take between having the user wait around for a long period of time to make all of your ad decisions or get the video started faster and sacrifice some ad decisions. So either you're balancing a long startup time or missing ads and therefore revenue. Beyond this, the process generally means that all of the ad pods are decisioned simultaneously. And this has a big effect on how programmatic systems behave. Programmatic systems want to decide ads one at a time. And when you ask them to say, decide 6 ad pods simultaneously, you're asking them to make a bunch of decisions without having the knowledge of whether they won any one of those decisions before they have to make the buying decision on a second one. And this is very challenging for those systems, and it will change their behavior, which ultimately results in reduced competition on some ad pods, a lack of fill in ad pods, and all of it kind of rolls up into lost revenue for publishers. There are other second order problems. There are, every ad that comes along has a time to live window that it can operate within while it's still valid. And if it's set for, say, 3 minutes, which is fairly standard for the industry, if your first ad pod is running 8 minutes into a stream, all of those ads can be invalidated. Now, generally, buyers will set those time to live windows appropriately, but due to human error, it doesn't always happen. So publishers will see discrepancies with their advertisers and lost revenue when they've even delivered the ads. I don't want to leave the group with the impression that these problems are insurmountable. Just simply understanding the mechanics of how the insertion process works is very important. And working with your ad partners, working with companies like Penthera, working with your ad stitcher to understand how can you deploy solutions that address all of these challenges.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. I think I have a better understanding now of why some publishers are leaving money on the table. You've mentioned programmatic a couple of times now. How critical is programmatic advertising in today's marketplace?
It's becoming more and more critical, right? It's been growing rapidly in connected TV and OTT. I think year over year, it's up on the order of 200% in terms of spending. And there are a number of reasons for why this is happening. One is it offers publishers the ability to expand reach beyond their direct advertisers. So new buyers can discover their inventory. They can buy that inventory in an automated way. And that has, a couple of effects on publishers. One is it enables the publishers to understand the true value of their inventory through dynamic pricing and increased demand. Another is that it deepens their bench of advertisers. So you're not going to be seeing the same advertiser over and over and over again, which ultimately provides the end user with a better experience. And programmatic also allows publishers to really maximize the value of their inventory through something called a unified auction or header bidding. Those are interchangeable terms. But what that does is it looks at individual ad opportunities and looks at the ads that you've sold directly as a publisher and looks at, is there a price that's higher from the market than what you actually sold it for, where you could take advantage of gaining some incremental revenue on a per impression or per ad basis. Obviously, the point of programmatic is to maximize revenue while maintaining, an excellent user experience. Like I said, you can offer a deeper supply of advertisers. Audience-based buying and selling is a key attribute to programmatic, and there's a lot of demand for that on the part of advertisers. And, typically or historically, audience-based buying has been available on TV only through MVPDs or cable companies through their addressable TV boxes. With OTT and CTV, publishers themselves with their own applications can now offer audience-based buying at scale, and this can drive a meaningful uplift in revenue. Publishers also now, or programmatic offers now publishers the most effective way of executing this advertising. And beyond this, there are some other meaningful drivers, right? Programmatic guaranteed, private deals, different structures of offering inventory to market enable the publisher to maintain direct advertiser relationships while executing through the programmatic pipes or the programmatic technology. Programmatic and overall offers a very efficient way of executing campaigns. And for better or for worse, this means that it enables publishers to streamline their operations. You require less headcount to deliver the same level of revenue production. And lastly, as I mentioned before, agencies want to execute this way, right? Agencies want to buy programmatically. And there are a few reasons for this. And similar to publishers, it creates operational efficiencies for them, but it also offers them a single point of truth for campaign measurement across multiple channels of campaign distribution. So if they're working with 100 different publishers, they can still see the reporting in one place and compare the performance of publisher A to publisher B.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. I guess if I was a platform or a channel listening today, I'd be wondering about how much money I might be leaving on the table. How can publishers maximize their existing technologies and infrastructure with that in mind?
Yeah, thanks for asking. There are a couple of key considerations. One is if you're using server-side advertising or server-side ad insertion for VOD, there's an enormous opportunity to capture lost revenue and improve user experience. If you're currently using client-side ad insertion, it may seem more cost-effective, right? Because it's the cost outlay for client-side is much lower than it is for server-side. But you really need to understand as a publisher what's going on in your landscape, right? You need to understand and evaluate the revenue loss from bad user experience. How many broken streams? How many failed ads are you having? How many users are abandoning the streams because the ads don't look great? And what does that mean in terms of revenue loss for you? We clearly think that publishers can maximize revenue by transitioning to server-side ad insertion. Now, once you're using server-side ad insertion, there are a number of things that publishers can do, as I mentioned, to maximize revenue opportunity. One is you need to understand the dynamics of how the insertion process works. And you should work very closely with your key partners, your programmatic partners, and your ad stitcher to evaluate, how am I offering inventory to market? Can I adjust my offerings to produce more optionality to buyers, to attract more buyers, enable buyers to buy from me in more varied ways that suit their needs? And finally, publishers should have a strong data strategy. So offer as rich a data set as possible to advertisers that are compliant with, GDPR and other regulations. You need to maintain control over your data, and this is really critical to make sure that there's no data leakage. What I mean by that is not that some hacker is coming in and getting your data, but that the data you're making available to buyers, and you're making it available to buyers in such a way that they can't model your audience and find that audience elsewhere and buy it potentially for less money. But also you need to maintain control over your data and understand the data flows to make sure that the data passing between your systems and the end advertising systems is stable. Doing all of these things can help you really maintain the value of your inventory, understand the value of your inventory, and maximize revenue production that you can extract from your CTV and OTT inventory.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Scott. I think I've learned a lot today, including why I sometimes get served the same ad 5 times in a row. Karen, do we have any questions from the audience for Scott?
We do indeed. Hold on one second. That was really good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Here we have one. Could the development of new technologies / infrastructure disrupt revenue opportunities for fast channels? That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a really broad and interesting question. I mean, the short answer is, I'm sure, right? It's hard to predict what we don't know is coming down the pike. But what we're seeing today from consumer behavior is that consumers like to consume content in 2 primary ways. One is lean back, turn on fast channels or flip through fast channels like they used to with cable. And the other is have a considered choice of, I want to watch this movie or this show right now, and I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch it, or I'm going to binge watch it by watching, like I am, the 11 seasons of Walking Dead on Netflix. So those behaviors are probably not going to change dramatically, but in terms of new technologies that could disrupt, fast revenue, it's possible. Where I see things going is new technologies that enhance the revenue generation, things like overlay ads or interactive ads that we see coming from companies like Triple Lift and others, where they're adding value to portions of the content or portions of the video that are actually content by doing in-content product placement and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then another one here. For publishers thinking about moving from CSAI to SSAI, what advice do you have? Do you have any specific things to keep in mind?
Yeah, the first step, and probably the most important step when you're making this evaluation of switching, is really understanding how your system is operating. And what I mean by that is, what is not just the cost of operating client side versus server side, as I mentioned before, but what's happening with your streams? Do you have scenarios where you're losing users because of the ad insertion process? And what does that mean in terms of revenue impact for your business? Because that will give you a much more holistic picture of what will I gain in terms of eliminating those problems by switching to server side versus what I'm dealing with today. And when we talk to publishers and we ask them that question, oftentimes they don't know the answer to that. And it opens their eyes that, oh, maybe they need to be looking someplace else other than just their ad server reports to determine what is their revenue, or really what is their opportunity cost of using client-side ad insertion.
Yeah, thank you. And then the last one for now, if anybody else has any questions, now's the time to jump in. The last one for now is, you mentioned SSAI provides a better viewing experience. Can you elaborate more on this?
Yeah, so server-side ad insertion really was developed for a few key reasons. One was to provide a mechanism for inserting advertising into streams in a low latency environment. So that's fast, which is semi-low latency, or say live sporting events, which really needs to be low latency because you don't want to be sitting in your house watching your football game on a streaming channel and your neighbor watching it on cable or satellite, and you hear them cheer before you see the play happening.
That happened to me in Spain once. There was two bars, and you could hear Manchester United, the fans were going crazy in one, and then about 2 seconds, ours scored. So we had the bad choice of bar. So I understand that bit.
Yeah, so that's one reason. The other reason is when you think about old school TV, or what we would call sort of traditional television, when you're watching that, the transition between content and advertising is very smooth, right? Maybe there's a momentary black screen, but generally speaking, it's really, really smooth, and it all looks like it's coming out of the same play out source. In other words, the ads have very high quality image, so does the video, and server side ad insertion was designed to enable that in streaming, to make sure that the ad experience is really quite seamless for users.
Perfect. And then one more. Do you see the day that ads will be fed to viewers based on their likes and preferences based on their interests?
Well, that's already being done in digital advertising, right? So web advertising. The question really comes down to, what data do you need in order to do that? And does that data fall afoul of regulations like GDPR and CCPA and other regulations that are coming down the pike? I mean, ultimately, end users want much more more better targeted advertising. But what they don't want is they don't want to shop for a product and then see that product advertised to them for the next 10 days wherever they go. That's really annoying and a bit creepy. So there's going to be a balance. And yes, ultimately, as long as it can be done compliant with regulations, the desire on the part of advertisers is to do exactly that, because they see much better performance in terms of user interaction than users actually buying the product or buying their service when it's really well targeted.
Super. Well, let me just check. No more questions. So what I will do is I will follow up sometime, probably tomorrow now, with Marco, we need to say there's a white paper, isn't there? I'll leave this.
That's right. So following up today's event, for everyone that's registered for the call today, you'll be receiving an email that will include a white paper from Penthera that looks into a little bit more detail on the issues that were discussed. Thank you, Karen.
Perfect. So I will send that out tomorrow. I'll send the white paper. I will send Scott and Marco's email addresses as well, in case there's any more questions. And I'll add in the details on the CTAM Europe Executive Management Programme as well, which is happening on Sunday. So you may be a bit late for this year, but it will be open for registration, will be open very soon for next March. So thank you very much. Thanks everybody for attending. Scott, thank you. The first, hopefully, of many webinars that you may do for us and discussions.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And
Marco, I hope this was insightful and spark some thinking for people on the call.
I'm sure it will. We've had a good attendance, and we've had good people have stayed on the call as well, which is a good sign.
So I wasn't boring.
No, that's true. True. Thank you both, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, CTAM.
Speak to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Scott.
Bye.
Bye.